Welcome once again to the third section of Psych 101, Elements of Psychology. I'm Dr. Paul Naduku. In this section, we'll look at methods of acquiring knowledge. There are so many methods by which we come to know things, so today we'll look at them. Earlier in the first section, I mentioned that psychology is a science, so we'll see why psychology adopts the scientific method if there are several others. So this is basically what we'll be looking at in this section. So let's start. We'll look at the non-scientific methods. There are we can group all the methods by which we come to acquire knowledge into two. We have the scientific method and then the non-scientific method. So we'll look at the non-scientific first, then we'll come to look at the scientific method. We'll look at the characteristics of the scientific method, some assumptions of the scientific method, and then the various steps that are involved in the scientific method. So let's start with the non-scientific method. There are several of them. One very common one by which we come to learn things all around us is through personal experiences. Personal experiences, as we travel, we move to places, people we interact with, we come to learn from them. The challenge with this type of acquiring knowledge is that it is limited in scope and could be misleading. Sometimes what you see and what you hear may not be really what you think they are. So it is misleading. Another means by which we come to acquire knowledge is what we refer to as informal knowledge, and that is knowledge gained from others. It could be from friends or perhaps people from authority. For example, as I stand here and I talk, students, because I'm a lecturer, may take whatever I say, even if I'm not saying the fact. So that is the challenge with knowledge from an authority figure. Sometimes we also acquire knowledge from common sense. Certain things, once you see them, you can tell what they should be used for. You can tell what purpose they should be. So that is common sense way of acquiring knowledge. And then also we have what we call intuition. That is the art of coming to direct knowledge or certainty without reasoning or inferring. There are certain times that certain knowledge just drop to us. You just sit there and it comes to mind that this can be used to do this, or this is the essence why this thing is appearing here. These are intuition. We don't rationally think about them so much. They just drop into our mind. And then also we have what we call tenacity. That is the state of holding fast onto something. You know, somebody will just tell you, you know, a piece of information and you just hold on to it for the rest of your life. That is tenacity. And then we have rationalism. That is the use of reasoning to arrive at a conclusion or knowledge. This is more about logic, the use of logic. If Amma is a girl, then it might be a student. So if Kofi is a girl, then definitely might be a student. These are logical ways of coming to knowledge. And then we have the empiricism. That is, if something is experienced, then it must exist, and therefore the experience must be valid and true. This, once you've come into contact with something, then we believe it exists. Once something has a name, we believe it exists, and so it must be there and it must be valid. So these are some of the means by which we come to acquire knowledge, but we refer to all this as non-scientific. Non-scientific. We don't engage in the scientific steps I mentioned earlier in acquiring them. Now let's look at the scientific method. The scientific method. What is science? Science simply means knowledge, and it is a series of steps or procedures and approaches that are used to gather knowledge. So science in itself is not a field of study as sometimes we are made to believe. Science is not. It is simply, you know, a systematic way of doing things. So today we'll learn a lot about science, the characteristics, the assumptions, and the various steps that are involved in science. And as I said earlier, what makes any discipline a scientific field is not the content, what the subject studies, but rather how they go about studying that. So let's look at the characteristics of the scientific method. the characteristics of the scientific method is that one, science is very objective, or what we call objectivity. It's objective in the sense that whatever any scientist is studying is out there for everyone to see. Everybody can see it. And the explanations that we give when it comes to science are not based on personal sentiment or personal views, but rather a very clear point of view that others can also rationally see it. So that is the first thing, the first characteristics of science. The second thing is that science has control. That's checks and balances. In science, we control so many other factors. There are so many checks. Whatever you have done, others have to do it and get the same thing. People can criticize you, people can question you, and a whole lot. So there are so many controls. Unlike if you take, for example, precognition, or what I said, prophecy. There is no control there. Somebody can just wake up and say, I have a prophecy, God has spoken to me about this and that. And so there is nothing that anybody can do. You either take it or you leave it. But science is not like that. And then when it comes to science, we also have what we call operationalism. We operationalize the concepts that we work with. We believe that words and terms have very broad meaning. So if you are talking about, for example, depression, what do we mean by depression? Is it that when somebody got a certain score on a certain scale, or you are talking of something else? So we put whatever variables and issues that we want to study into a very strict meaning so that others can see precisely what we are talking about. And then also another feature of scientific method is replication. Whatever studies or inquiry that somebody has done and has come up with a result, it should be possible for another scientist to repeat it and get the same finding. That is what we refer to as replication. It should be able for another researcher to repeat the study and get the same thing. And science being objective, control, makes it very open. It's an open field. Anybody can enter, provided you adhere to the steps that are involved. So there is openness when it comes to science. There are no secrecy. Whatever you are doing, anybody can also be able to do that. And then science is also concerned with empirical approach. They don't just do things anyhow. They follow steps. So there are steps that are involved. You first need to have a problem. You first need to define it, decide on your sample, and things like that. So there are steps that are involved in science. And then finally, science also have a feature of invariance. We believe that knowledge is not one shot. Whatever knowledge that science has come up with, it could change. That knowledge could change. It is not the end. So things will change as more studies are being done. So these are some characteristics of the scientific method that we need to be abreast with. Now let's look at some assumptions of science. There are some few assumptions of science that we also need to understand. One is that science believes in reality. That is, science can bring about underlying facts no matter where it is. Science believes that there are things out there that we can get hold of. Believes that whatever they are reporting is real. They are not something that they are just conjuring. And then also rationality, we have talked about it. Science is based on logic and reasoning. They always provide logical basis for whatever they study. And then science also believes that there is uniformity in nature. That is, there is order in nature, and that natural events follow some known patterns and principles. Science believes that things just do not happen. There are always causes behind it. One thing will lead to the other. There could be immediate causes, there could be remote causes. So science believes in that. And then science also believes in causation, that everything that happens will have a cause. There is something definitely behind it. And then finally, science also believes that there is discoverability. That is, science must help discover or unearth everything underlying causes. Science believes that whatever happens, the causes are there, so we should be able to get there. We should be able to discover. We should be able to come up with some new false. So these are very important assumptions that underlie the scientific method. Now with this, let's move on to look at the steps that are involved in the scientific method. There are basically 7 steps that are involved if you want to engage in the enterprise of science. If you want to systematically do something, there are 7 steps. First is that there should be careful observation. You need to pay attention to details. For you to be a good scientist, you need to pay attention to details. Watch carefully what is happening around you. And once you do that, you will be able to move on to the next step. You'll be able to identify a problem to be solved or a problem to be investigated. So that is the second step, problem identification. If there is no problem, if there is no challenge, if there's no tangible issue, then there wouldn't be any need for a scientific endeavor to take place. So that is a very key thing, identification of what exactly you want to look at. Do you want to look at the relationship between aggression and depression or something else? And then once you've identified what you want to do, the next thing you have to do is to read about what others have done concerning that topic. That is what we refer to as literature review. Find out what others have done, what their conclusions are, what they think future research should do, what the gaps are. You need to know, and this is basically to avoid duplication of scientific work, because science is very expensive, and so there is no need for duplication. So we need to build on from where others have done. And once you've done the literature review, automatically you come up with hypothesis that you want to test. So hypothesis formulation is the 4th step. Hypotheses are simply intellectual or tentative guess as to how variables are related. You believe that A will lead to B, but you don't have the facts yet. That is what you want to do the research to confirm or not. And then the 5th thing, once you have your hypothesis, then you are now set for the study. So you now design the study. How do you want to do it? Do you want to do an experiment? Do you want to do a survey? Do you want to do a case study? Do you want to do an observation? You now have to design the study and where you want to do it. And then the 6th one is your data gathering. How you get your data. How are you going to measure them? Where will you get them? And then your analysis of it. And then finally, once you've obtained the data from the research that you have designed, the study that you have designed, then you write your report, the interpretation and conclusion of the study. So you tell us what the data means, the analysis, what does it mean? What new thing have you come out from your study? And basically when you do that, then we are talking about publication, making your information known, your new finding known for others to hold on to or for others to work with. So these are basically the steps that are involved in the scientific method. So the question to ask is that, is psychology a science or not? And as I said, the issue of whether psychology is a science can be resolved by an understanding of what constitutes science. Science is not a specific subject, but ways or procedures of acquiring knowledge and gathering information. It consists of a combination of the assumptions, the characteristics, and the procedures that are involved in the scientific method. So there is the need to determine whether the assumptions, characteristics, and procedures of science fits into what psychologists engage in. Psychology also accepts and follow the assumptions of uniformity, reality, rationality, causation, and discoverability. So the assumptions become the guiding principles in the everyday practice of psychology. So psychologists basically also works with all these characteristics. We also identify problem, we formulate hypotheses, we collect data, and all that. So all these characteristics are integral part of psychology and helps the field in making valid and objective conclusions on human behavior. So psychology is a science because it accepts the scientific assumptions, it adheres to the characteristics, it follows the scientific steps in studying human behavior. Thank you.